and because I can hear Angie. Is most everybody hearing me okay? Just with a thumbs up if you,
Yep.
yeah. Okay, great. So without further ado, we're going to get started with Minnesota paid leave basics. My name's Maureen Dunaway. I work at Deed. I work in unemployment insurance, and I got super interested in paid leave with the last negotiation cycle and wondering how it was going to impact us, and tried to really hard to stay on top of that. Plus, we in unemployment, we collect their taxes, so we're somewhat involved with the paid leave program, and that's how you ended up with me as a facilitator. So one moment. Make sure I've got there we go. So paid leave was enacted back in 2023 when we had the trifecta and the 30 big things of legislation that came through the House and Senate at that time. It was updated a little bit in the May 2024 statutes, and then it went live on January 1st of 2026. It provides job protections similar to those under FMLA, including for people who would not otherwise be eligible for FMLA, and it is a partial wage replacement paid by the state. So I want to make sure that that's clear that this isn't part of our contract. This is something that everybody in the state is eligible for if they're working and meet the requirements for it. It's available to individuals who take leave for qualifying conditions. It is funded by premiums made up of contributions from employees and employers. Those began January 1st of 2026. The rate for 2026 is 0.88% for large employers, and we'd fall under that. And the state is splitting that with its employees at 0.44 each. Almost everybody in Minnesota is doing that. It's very rare for an employer to take on more than the share than they're required to do. So the types of leaves that you can have, um, there is family leave, which is up to 12 weeks. And there's bonding leave to deal with the birth of a child, and that includes, birthing parents, non-birthing parents, adoptive parents, foster care. All of those can be qualifying conditions. There's caring leave to care for a family member with a serious health condition. So it can help, like, let's say you have a parent who's having surgery. As long as they meet that 7-day requirement, you can take care of them with that. Safety leave because of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking of the individual or the individual's family member, and active duty leave, which unfortunately we may be seeing more of. It's leave because of a family member going on active duty, or they've been notified of an impending call or order to active duty to help prepare. And, like sometimes you need that time to get affairs in order while that deployment is going to happen. And then medical leave can be up to 2 weeks. So that's leave to care for your own serious medical condition. Recovery time from pregnancy is included in medical leave. Medical leave can be combined with family leave. Maximum of 20 weeks total leave in a benefit year. And with Minnesota paid leave, it is a rolling year starting with the first leave. So qualifying conditions for either type of leave must last more than 7 days, or at least 7 days, and they don't need to be consecutive. And they must be certified by a healthcare provider or designated professional. And total leave in a benefit year, this is just to kind of remind folks, you could have medical and you could have family. You couldn't have 2 medicals or 2 families, and you can have up to 20 total weeks between the two in that year. So it is a partial wage replacement. It's calculated as a percentage of your average weekly wage. So as you can see on this little graph, lower wage earners get paid a higher percentage. It does max out at 1,423 per week, and that is the fiscal year 25 average wage that was calculated in Minnesota. So that's why that's the max. And and that is calculated that way. So 90% under 71150, 71150 to 1423, 66%, and then anybody above 1423 for their wage, they get paid 55%, and with that max in mind. There is a calculator at the Minnesota paid leave site, so you can kind of guess how much you would get, but they also will determine that when you file your claim. So comparison with other leaves. We have paid parental leave is the only contractual one that's fully contractual. We get 6 weeks, it's at full pay, needs to be used within 6 months of the qualifying event. Extensions may be granted for up to 12 months for intermittent use by the appointing authority. And, people have been using it that way for a while now. And then family medical leave, FMLA, is federal. It's 12 weeks, it's unpaid, and it's concurrent with MPL and PPL. And then Minnesota paid leave is what we're talking about, and that's 12 weeks. If medical or family, up to 20 weeks of total combined per year. It's a partial pay replacement. It needs to be used within 12 months of the qualifying event, particularly thinking bonding leave here. And you do not have to spend down other leaves to use it. So you don't have to use your sick time first, is what we're saying there. It runs concurrently. That is on the same clock with most other leaves, including FMLA and medical leave. So that being said, if you file for Minnesota paid leave, and this is really important, your FMLA clock starts at the same time. So, and vice versa. So if you file for FMLA, they are going to start your Minnesota paid leave clock, even if you did not file for Minnesota paid leave, because they are concurrent, and that clock starts ticking the moment that you make the filing of either of those. So it probably, since it's going to be counted against your Minnesota paid leave time, if you're taking FMLA, you might as well get paid for it and file the MPL claim as well. If you take paid parental leave during your 20 weeks of MPL, it will run concurrently, meaning that will shorten the time overall that you can collect. But if you have any paid parental leave remaining after the 20 weeks of MPL, you may use that time at the end to extend your total leave. So you have to use PPL within 6 months of the birth or adoption of the child, unless the appointing authority agrees to allow intermittent use, which they've been known to do and are doing at several agencies. So recommended use of paid leave for the birthing parent because of that. You use that MPL first since the clock starts ticking on day 1. And then you can supplement with sick leave if applicable, PPL if applicable, and vacation leave in that order if you prefer to make your wages whole. And at the 20-week mark, you can use PPL for 6 more weeks of full pay if you didn't use any PPL to supplement the Minnesota paid leave. That does make it a little harder. I've worked with a couple of employees to stretch it because you can't use that vacation leave when you're on the bonding leave. Because to maximize and get a full 26 weeks, you'd have to, do 8 weeks of medical and your medical documents would have to show that you had 8 weeks of medical, and then 12 weeks of bonding, and then the 6 weeks of PPL. And because PPL gets supplemented before vacation, that bonding leave would be without supplementation, and not everybody can do that. You can supplement with the PPL, extend it out a little bit more, end up somewhere between that 20 and 26 weeks mark. But I just wanted to point out that if you want to take the full 26 weeks, this is the order that would really be needed to be used because of the fact that MMB chose to run these concurrently with us. So they are allowing employees to top off their MPL payments with paid leave upon request of the employee. And if you do choose to supplement, you must elect in writing whether and how much. Oh, and so that would be something that you would want to do with your employer, with HR ahead of time, and work out exactly how you're going to plan this. So using accrued sick leave. If an employee chooses to supplement with paid leave, MMB has determined that the employee first use sick leave if applicable, then PPL if applicable, lastly, vacation leave. So, and sick leave cannot be used for bonding time with the new child, but may be used for recovery from childbirth. So that gets back to where I was talking about the order of how you take them and how you might have some time in there, because vacation leave is last. if you can't make it on just your MPL, Minnesota paid leave, you might want to supplement with some PPL and then use whatever's left when you're done. But it would shorten your overall time if you did that. So how much can you supplement? You can't receive more than your regular wage or salary in combined Minnesota paid leave benefits, supplementing with paid leave or payment for hours worked. So that you have to be really careful with how you do that. And that's why you should plan that out ahead of time with HR so they know how much you're going to be doing each pay period so you don't run over with that. Exceptions to this. Short-term disability is an insurance benefit that you've paid for. It's not a paid leave. You know, you're usually on unpaid medical leave when you take it. And it is unaffected by MPL, meaning that short-term disability doesn't count towards your replacement wage. Might be a good time to maybe, when you're using bonding leave, do that. But, you know, or other ways. I know people that are just going to do short-term disability and Minnesota paid leave, and that works out fairly well, other than we'll talk about deductions later. But long-term disability amounts are reduced by Minnesota paid leave benefits. So just want to make it clear that short-term disability, because of the way it's constructed, doesn't affect Minnesota paid leave and vice versa. But long-term disability can be, and it is reduced. So, you know, they're two different leaves. They have different rules, and based on their rules, short-term disability, you can go over your wage with it, with using Minnesota paid leave, but you can't with long-term disability. Do you have to supplement? This is really important. FMLA policy was updated to no longer require employees to exhaust their sick leave, since FMLA is running concurrently with MPL, and employees cannot be required to supplement their Minnesota paid leave. So it is completely and utterly optional. So if your HR is trying to push you into doing something that you are not comfortable with, or exhausting some of your sick leave that you don't want to use, they cannot require you to do that when you take FMLA. A lot of the forms still say that. So I've had a couple people send me the outdated forms, and they say that you got to spend down your sick leave. But FMLA policy for MMB has been updated to reflect this change, should you run into any issues with your agency. So if you receive more than your regular wage or salary due to the combination of benefits, supplementing, and payment for hours worked, especially with intermittent use, that can result in an overpayment, and we're responsible for paying back that overpayment. So just be very careful when you, you know, especially if you're using this intermittently and you're working, maybe taking a little sick leave as you go, just be careful that you don't go over your weekly wage when you're doing this, and make sure you're working really closely with HR to make sure that that doesn't happen. Also, the first week of Minnesota paid leave is always paid retroactively because it takes a while for that claim to go through. If you supplement your full regular wage or salary that week, it would result in an overpayment because you'd be paid for both. So just make sure that you are careful about that. And then I can't emphasize enough how, you know, it's best to just plan with your HR person, because you do have to notify them that you're taking this leave. So work with them to figure out how you're going to do this supplementation at the same time. So intermittent Minnesota paid leave. All the types of MPL protected leave can be taken continuously or intermittently or on a reduced schedule basis where you're working part of the time, which makes it somewhat intermittent, but you know, it's scheduled, you know, you're doing it continuously, but only part-time. All of those are allowed, but you do have to show that that's going to be beneficial if it's based on your serious health condition. I mean, a lot of times people need intermittent leave for a serious health condition, but say it's something where it's requiring a hospital stay or something like that, you know, they will be asked to certify that intermittent leave is the way that it's supposed to go. So, you know, your doctor needs to be showing that with medical leave, that the kind of leave you're taking and the way you want to take it is the way that you should be taking it. It should, whatever they submit for you should reflect the way that you're planning to take that. So any schedule you choose, whether it be continuous, intermittent, or reduced schedule, should be planned and approved ahead of time with both HR and Minnesota paid leave. So MMB policy, in accordance with statute, limits intermittent leave to 480 hours of MPL per year. That is 12 weeks. 48 hours, 480 hours works out to 12 weeks. And it is a rolling year that begins with the first claim. So that can be a little dicey when you look at how FMLA is on a fiscal year and starts July 1st. And MPL starts, when you start your claim. I mean, this year, they're all starting together, but I imagine we'll see some diverting from that with the way that the fiscal year runs for FMLA versus Minnesota paid leave being based at the time of the claim. So I'm sure HRs are just going to do wonderfully with that. And then job protections on return. On return from Minnesota paid leave, an employee is entitled to be returned to the same position they held when leave began, or to an equivalent position with equivalent benefits, pay, and other terms and conditions. Exceptions could apply for people who have been employed less than 90 days. So if that's going to be you, you'd want to talk with HR prior to taking leave to make sure that you understand the impact. But for all you folks between 90 days and like the year it takes to get to FMLA, you can still take the Minnesota paid leave. And, if you've ever been in that shoes where you needed FMLA and you weren't quite at the year mark yet, this can be a game changer and a lifesaver for people in that situation. So, keep that in mind, stewards, when you're working particularly with newer employees who are worried about not qualifying for FMLA, because you do have those same job protections as long as it's not under the 90 days. So they can't discipline, discharge, penalize, interfere with, threaten, restrain, coerce, or any other kind of retaliation that's against an employee. It's very similar to the same protections you have federally under FMLA, and it's under the state MPL law. And that's important because FMLA is 12 weeks. MPL can take you up to that 20 weeks. So once you get past that FMLA time, you still have those job protections. During any leave, the agency has to maintain coverage under any group insurance policy that you're with, your group subscriber contract or healthcare plan for the employee and any dependents as if the employee were not on leave. So you pay your part of the premium, and the state is still required to pay theirs. It isn't a COBRA situation. For those of you that might be wondering what I mean by that, sometimes when people have been on other types of leaves, it has meant paying the full premium, both employer and employee portion, which is way more. So you do still have to pay your premium, and they'll deduct that right from your supplements if you do that. Otherwise, you'll owe it when you return to work, your portion of the premium. So as it states here, you have to continue paying your part of the premium. And since your benefits are paid directly to you, if you do supplement with those other paid leaves, that could pay for your share of premiums. But if you don't supplement, you just will be billed just like people are when they come back from like other unpaid medical leaves. It'll be treated like that by CGIP. So pension contributions are not deducted from MPL wage replacement because it's not a wage. So keeping that in mind, and particularly if you're in your high five and you're trying to qualify for your max for MSRS or any other pension plan that you might have, you can contact them. They have ways that you can supplement or deal with that, or do like catch-up premiums and things like that. So you should contact MSRS for any questions about how that's going to affect your pension while you're on Minnesota paid leave, if that's a concern of yours. So you will accrue sick and vacation leave when you're in paid status, and in accordance with the collective bargaining agreement and compensation plans. So that sounds very MMB-like, and that's for a reason, because it comes from their policy. But we do have contract language around this. I didn't put it in here because it's in multiple spots. There's the Article 10 about how vacation leave accrues. Sick leave is a different article, and those accruals, are affected, based on how much you're working as well. And then you also have, unpaid statuses for purpose of leave accruals. And, the collective bargaining agreement has details on what time counts towards accruals. So like, obviously your sick and vacation would, but people are sometimes on other leaves that count towards accrual, like negotiators and board of directors, they have the union leave. But there's other leaves that are in the leave portion of the contract that also may have accruals if you're combining. So just keep that in mind, that when you're getting Minnesota paid leave only, you are in that unpaid status and wouldn't be accruing. And any portion of your benefits that week would not be accruing. So it would only be the portion where you're being paid by the state and by your contractual things. Does that make sense? Okay. So holiday pay is generally not great while you're on Minnesota paid leave, because you have to work either a full day or use a full day of accrued paid leave of some kind for the full scheduled workday before and after to receive full holiday pay. And since your Minnesota paid leave will always be greater than 50% unless you're way over to, hit the max, this is normally not a really great exchange. I do want to point out that this has always been the policy about holiday pay. When people aren't in that paid status before or after they lose, it's just that we'll see it more with Minnesota paid leave being implemented and people taking it more. So I would talk to HR about that, because yes, it could also tip you over if you get the holiday pay in addition to the Minnesota paid leave, in addition to whatever you're supplementing with. So just be really careful. And I'm sorry, but you may lose out on holiday pay while you're on Minnesota paid leave. So when you apply for it, if foreseeable, try to notify HR at least 30 days in advance of your intent to take leave. So that won't always be possible. Events happen, things happen that you didn't know were coming. A lot of people couldn't do 30 days because it's a new program, but when you can, try to get in touch with them at least 30 days in advance of your intent to take the leave. Each agency is responsible for its own notification policies and procedures. So, you want to reach out to HR to ensure you know what those are. It's usually the same person at most HRs that does the FMLA coordination, that also does the Minnesota paid leave, or I should say person or people, because some of them have had to add some staff. And then they will require proper documentation for the leave. So the sufficient documentation includes a Family Medical Leave Act medical certification form, an MPL medical certification form, or other written notice allowed by the MPL law. And they do have a toolkit online when you go to the Minnesota Paid Leave website that has forms that you can use if they're not ones that we would normally use. I'm thinking particularly of like, maybe the domestic abuse or stalking leave or the military leave. We don't currently have forms for that, but they do have those out at Minnesota Paid Leave, including some FMLA type forms for medical and bonding as well. So they are estimating at least 2 weeks for an application to be filed. I know that they're pretty stressed out there right now and they're way over what they had anticipated for claims. So, if you have a complicated case, it could take longer. It's designed to pay benefits for each week of approved leave. So there's not a waiting period. It's not like there's a time where you have to not get benefits in order to be eligible. Unemployment insurance is like that, where you have to serve an eligible week unpaid before you're able to have any additional benefits. Paid leave isn't like that, but you may have to wait to receive those benefits, but they'll be retroactive to the week of your claim. So that's kind of the difference between like that program and programs that do have a waiting period. And in some cases, you got to wait at least 7 calendar days of leave have occurred, because you might not know how long you are going to be out, and so you got to show that it's going to be the full 7 days to qualify for Minnesota paid leave before you can apply for those partial wage benefits. If you're approved, you are retroactively paid partial wage benefits for that period of time. So it can be a little complicated if you have an emergency, but you can still, work it through. So just keep in mind, this is a brand new program. New claims right now are sometimes taking a little longer, especially as they've had to find workarounds for things that were in statute, but not necessarily in how their computer programming happens. Anybody who's ever launched anything new is probably nodding their head right now, understanding that it can be a little messy. They do expect this to improve as they get through the high number of new claims and as they work out the issues with the new program. And, have that same understanding with HR. This is new to them too. And sometimes they might not get it right. And if something doesn't sound right, I'd grab a steward and, we'll take a look at that. And stewards, if you're panicking right now, you can always reach out to me if you're not sure. And we can talk about this. And the BAs have received some training, is my understanding too. And, some of them are right there when we talked to MMB about the program, when we talked about before launch. So there are resources that we can get to if, things are just not sounding right. So what if you need to backdate your Minnesota paid leave application? It allows them to apply for benefits after the leave has begun. It has to be submitted within 30 days from the start of the leave. My understanding is they do have some system limitations that make it hard to backdate more than a week, but they'll have to find workarounds to make that happen. But that was the answer we got from paid leave, was 30 days. And then you would have to show, if it's going to be longer than that, you'd have to show good cause. And, that might include difficulty obtaining required documentation, safety concerns, or other circumstances outside of the individual's control. And so after submitting the application, you'd have time to provide that required documentation, such as medical certification, and things like that. And again, extensions can be granted for good cause. And as the program develops, there may be changes to this policy, but that was the answer that we had received recently when we reached out to ask the program how that worked with any sort of backdating. So, if you have found out that, hey, they've been deducting Minnesota paid leave from your leave balances, and you just thought you were only on FMLA, and they're like, maybe I should do paid leave, you do have some time to get that filed if you're in that situation. So here are some links, and we can, put those in the chat. But there's Minnesota paid leave law, the Minnesota paid leave website, and Minnesota paid leave policies. And then, if you need to find a steward, got the link here. I'll put those in the chat in just a moment once I stop sharing my screen, unless somebody else wants to do that for me. And then now we'll take questions. So, please just understand this is a new program that's still in the implementation phase. If I don't know the answer confidently, we'll create a parking lot and get back to folks. We'll just send it out to the group and say, these are the ones, here's the answers to the questions that we weren't able to answer today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen to take questions. And we can start doing some of those things. So
I was going to say we have a hand raised. We had a number of questions in the chat, so I don't know if we want to go with the chat questions or if we want to go with the hand raised and then come back to the chat questions.
Let's do a couple of the chat questions, then do the hand raised, and then, come back. Would that work?
Yeah, so just a couple of, I guess, maybe housekeeping things. So some people were just asking about, will the PowerPoint be available to us afterwards? And what about the recording? And I saw in the chat that the recording will be posted. So I thought I would share that. I did not know, but the PowerPoint, I wanted to make sure that was okay.
I'm okay with sharing it. Cynthia, are you all right with that going on?
Yes, I will post both to the MAPE webpage, and
Excellent.
yeah, so they'll be available. We'll also make sure to put it in next week's newsletter so people who aren't on here can also get a heads up that it is available.
Yeah, and then just I think a couple of other questions before we maybe go to the hand raise. So there are just a few questions and maybe they were answered, but just to recap, maybe
Sure.
not everyone heard. So some people asked, and I'll just ask like 3 of them. So how does it interact with the STD benefits? Does the state require us to use our sick leave before using family leave? And then there was a question, is this taxed? So is it taxed? Sorry if that wasn't
Yeah,
clear.
it should be a taxable income because it is going to be considered an income. They'll generate a tax document at the end of the year. However, the others, let's see, you don't have to use up your sick leave before you can take Minnesota paid leave, and with short-term disability, you can take both, and they don't affect one another. So if you're on like medical leave and you want to use Minnesota paid leave and short-term disability, you just would need to follow the rules of short-term disability. But just being on MPL does not affect it. They can be used together. Why don't we go ahead and take the hand that's up, and then we'll go back to questions in the chat.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm on my pronunciation, but I believe that is you, Madeline Turnquist Olson.
Yes, thank you. First, thank you, Maureen, Cynthia, and Danielle for doing all this hard work. I'm going to put a screenshot in the chat just for reference. So I went on FMLA and paid paternity leave in 2004, and I am a MAPE leader and a MAPE steward, and I had originally worked working at Minnesota DNR. So I read all the documents and everything and thought I was good to go. And then soon as I have, a C-section and a baby, then our HR coordinator for our FMLA leave was like, here are these secret timesheet codes that you can use. And I put a screenshot of that in the chat, which surprised me that there were, different codes for FMLA sick, holiday. It was very, different on how your days were going to be chopped up in your 12 weeks of FMLA. I am just wondering if there are now new timesheet sort of codes that employees should be using in self-service, and how that information can be enlightened to employees before they go on leave, especially pre-planned leave like having a baby, or, say you have a hip surgery or a knee surgery, something that's not emergency. I would say I had to do, and I'll put another snippet in the chat. I had to send my HR team 7 different versions of a color-coded calendar before we were on the same page, because I would do my timesheet and our HR person would say, that's not right. You can't use that. You can't do it this way. I had my baby on a holiday. You don't get that holiday. It's an FMLA holiday. So with this new sort of, you can double dip, you can't double dip. If you want to use your paid parental leave, which is 6 weeks of full pay by the state, how can you sort of get that, plan that out with, the exceptions of like holiday is coded differently if you're just going to use Minnesota paid leave, but not top off. And, there's so many nuances. What are ways that, HR or our meet and confer teams can work to sort of enlighten, the users of this program? Because I was really taken aback after I started my leave and then was given what I would consider these like secret timesheet codes.
And this was before Minnesota paid leave that you got the secret timesheet codes?
Correct. And
Okay.
so, and I would consider myself, pretty adept at the policies. I'm a MAPE steward. I'm a local leader. So I had read every document multiple times and was like, yep, going to go into leave, well prepared. And then I literally took leave. And then they're like, here are these secret timesheet codes. And I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah, I think that happens to us all with FMLA. And so MPL has a couple of additional codes that they have people use. And so when you're planning that ahead of time, I would ask them, which codes to use when. But basically, there's one for sick, like for medical, and one for family, whether it's bonding or other. And so they've created a couple of new codes for that, and you would use that when you're on the Minnesota paid leave. And the thing is, most of the agencies are using those Minnesota paid leave codes in lieu of the FMLA codes because they run concurrently. My understanding is pretty much everywhere that that's been happening. And so they'll tell you which code to use ahead of time when you work out that you're going to be on the Minnesota paid leave. So, but yes, they have created a couple of new codes.
Yeah, and I guess if, as
Mhm.
I'm sure your presentation or more information will develop, if those could sort of be brought into this presentation, just as a reminder for users that like there could be surprises and be prepared for that, and really push your HR to be transparent. So yeah, and I think somebody put the new codes in the chat just so people aren't caught off guard. So I think that's sort of my only question, is that really push for HR to be transparent at all the agencies. Thank you.
Yeah, and that, I mean, Meet and Confer should definitely be doing that if it's not being transparent. I did talk to Deeds Meet HR about this at our last Meet and Confer and just said, we understand that this is new and it's hard for people, but we need to work on really being transparent and making sure people have their leaves planned out well ahead of time. So let's go back to chats and questions in the chat.
Yeah, quite a number of them. One person asked, they said, I have a condition that I anticipate requires intermittent leave, but I can't absolutely guarantee that it will result in 7 days of missed work. Can I still take NPL?
Yeah, I mean, if you have documentation that this is going to be at least a 7-day event, and you can get the things from your doctor that you would get for like FMLA for the same type of condition, you could file for for Minnesota paid leave for that too, and take it intermittently. MAB is allowing it up to 480 hours, which is 12 weeks of it. So yes.
And someone else had a question about the definition of family under MPL for the purposes of taking family leave to care for others.
Well, Minnesota has one of the most broad definitions of family that, of any state, and we're following that definition of family. So if you look at like our contract also broadly defines it, or it's a save time law. I know Cass is here from paid leave. If you don't mind me putting you on the spot, Cass, do you have any deviations that you're aware of on the definition of family with Minnesota paid leave?
I see that someone has actually copied a lovely definition into the chat of all of the things that are covered in there.
Oh, okay.
Very
I probably just didn't
explicitly.
get that far. So yes, thank you. And thank you, Cass, for letting me put you on the spot. So yes, the definition of family is broad, and that's who you can use it for.
There's also a question, does the 480-hour limit for intermittent MPL leave also apply for a reduced schedule MPL leave?
Not necessarily, because it's not intermittent. So, because it's going to stretch out over time. So, if you're only taking it part-time, I think I'll follow up on that though, because my understanding is I believe they treat the reduced schedule kind of intermittently, and I don't want to be wrong on that. So
we do have a hand up from a Kristen Loomer.
Okay.
Hi there. I just copying someone else's question that was also in the chat too, but for MPL, is that the average weekly based on gross or take home?
It's based on gross. I'm sure we would have gotten there eventually, but yes, it's based on your gross.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just going to type that in, gross. So we've got that. We've had a few questions about when was FMLA policy updated to no longer require employees to exhaust sick leave?
The same time that they launched their Minnesota paid leave policy, which was towards the end of last year.
And then if we already get FMLA, did the MPL automatically start? January 1st of
It may
2026?
have, if you've been taking it already this year, they may be crediting that towards your FMLA balance because of it being concurrent. Now, maybe you were getting FMLA last year. They won't be able to do that because, FMLA is on that fiscal year, July 1st to June 30th. So it would only be anything after January 1st. But yeah, they could, because of the running concurrent, you could see any potential NPL balance reduced anything after January 1st of this year.
And then another question is, I was told paid status must exceed 50% in each payroll period. Is that right?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that again?
Yeah, I was told paid status must exceed 50% in each payroll period. Is that right?
I'm not sure what they mean by that. Did the person who asked that question want to clarify what they mean by the paid status must exceed 50%?
Maureen, that was me. I called, HR told me that if I were to go on my medical leave, like in the middle of a pay period, cool, because I've got the first week, paid at 100, like a normal paycheck. So my next
Mhm.
week will be unpaid. So I'm paid 50%. So then that's cool. But the week following, the next week following on medical leave, I'd be out that whole 2-week period. Therefore, I'm not, if I'm supplementing. So I'm sorry, if I'm supplementing the paid leave and just bumping it up a little, if those days that I bump it up don't reach 50% of my paycheck, then that causes issues with it causes issues.
Well,
Period.
I mean, as long as there's enough being paid to you that they can make your health care deductions and things like that, there's nothing in the policy that requires it to be 50%. And the law states that they can't make you supplement at all. So, I mean, how much you choose to supplement is up to you. It's just that it could mess things up with like healthcare deductions and things like that if you don't have enough to deduct for healthcare. But as long as you do, they can't make it be 50%.
And
Does
MSRS
that
had
help?
indicated that it might affect your like
Absolutely.
service,
Yeah.
years of service, so that you
Yeah,
can
it
buy
could
that
affect
back.
your high five for
I
sure.
got it. Okay.
Yeah, because that would be time that you wouldn't be contributing to MSRS. But they do have program. I mean, you should talk to somebody over there if you're going to be using this because yeah, and using it without supplementation and all of that, or with, just, some supplementation, because they have ways that you can address that. And so you'd want to talk to them about those ways. I'm not going to speak to that program. I'm not an expert, and that is what they're there for. But yes, they do have ways to do that.
And
Mhm.
they are very helpful, but it was just confusing. So I wanted to just kind of double tap
Mhm.
back and see if you had gotten some information too.
Just that it does, anything that you are on an unpaid status for. And when you're an MPL, that is an unpaid status as far as the state's concerned, because, your employer is not paying you. It's this program that's paying you, would not be counted towards your, MSRS.
Okay,
So
thank you.
looks
Mhm.
like there's two questions sort of connect to what Kristen was asking too. So someone just said slightly different question about PPL. Can you take that leave over 12 weeks if you work half-time hours? And then another sort of related question is, does not supplementing MPL with sick vacation time put you or someone at risk of not receiving insurance benefits? And I think you kind of spoke a little bit to that, but I don't know if you want to cover it.
Yeah, they're required. Okay, let's start with the first one. PPL is in Semaphore, I believe, weekly. And so it can be kind of hard sometimes to do that without some finessing of the time cards if you're just on straight PPL and taking it at a reduced amount. But it is allowed to be taken intermittently with, permission from the appointing authority. So if you work it out with HR that you're going to do that, they'll just have to figure out what your time cards need to look like, taking MPL out of that category. I know I've had a couple people doing that here at Deed, and it's just hard because it is, for whatever reason, they set it up in 1 week increments, and that led to some people wanting to, kind of transition their time back. And so trying to figure out how to do that to make it go right in the system, you just would need to work with HR to do that, but it is possible. And then could you remind me what the second question was again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think it's just someone just asked about not supplementing MPL with sick vacation time, if that's putting someone at risk of not receiving their insurance benefits.
Well, they have to continue it. What it puts them at risk of is owing their insurance premium when they return to work. They're required by law to continue your coverage at the employee level, but you do run the risk of, having a pretty significant deduction for health insurance benefits if you're not able to pay anything along the way.
Okay, looks like there is quite a lot of questions. So some people asked, and maybe some of these were answered, but is PPL only for the actual parents of the child, or can it be used for grandparents taking care of the child, or for parents of the pregnant mother, which is the employee's daughter, either before birth or after?
PPL or MPL?
That's a good
Because
question. This
PPL
says
is for parents, but whether they're adoptive or birth or whatever, PPL is specifically for parents, but MPL has caring leave. So it is potential that those people that you just mentioned could take caring leave for the people in question.
Okay, so the clarification is really you're talking about this said PPL, but maybe this is more an MPL kind of thing.
Right.
With the people mentioned in there.
Yeah, because MPL is more expensive than PPL.
And then this is a long one. Is there anything that can be done if someone received info from HR at the end of last year that conflicts with how their leave is being applied this year? So for example, they had a baby in October, was told that they would have 12 weeks of MPL that would start after PPL was finished, now being told that the MPL started running on January 1st instead of January 25th. So I don't know if that's like a steward question or...
Well, it's one of those where they were wrong and they have to do it correctly. So, I mean, yes, you try to work with them and figure that out, but if it runs concurrently, there's not much we can do to change that it runs concurrently. I'm sorry.
So you're saying the answer basically from them was wrong?
Yeah.
Okay. Just make sure that I get that. Oh, and just someone in the chat just noted that the PPL is paid parent leave, part of our MAPE contract, where the employer pays you 100% of wages, versus MPL, which is Minnesota paid leave, family leave, and medical leave. So in case people are kind of wondering.
Yeah, and that'll be on one of the slides too, the differences between the two. So, when we post that, if you forget which is which, it'll be up there.
And I think someone was asking too, like, I know you gave a couple of scenarios, so I don't know if that was sufficient for this person, but they were saying like, is there a way that we can create or that exists somewhere like a decision tree, like scenarios like with a decision tree, like about which to use? Like, I don't know if they're saying like, if this, then this kind of thing, but so I don't know if that's a question as much as an ask. So I'll throw that out there as just a thing. And then it looks like we've got a question from Madeline as well. Hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, Danielle, Maureen, I was just going to comment on, if employees and, MAPE members are really struggling to figure out sort of like a decision tree of like, do I use FMLA, paid parental leave, Minnesota leave? My best suggestion is to, make a calendar and circle the days and sort of go back and forth with your HR and your supervisor as much as you can before you go on leave to get clarification, because there's going to be those exceptions of you had your baby on that holiday. You don't get that holiday. That's an FMLA holiday, and how things are paid out. And especially if you're going to top off your wages, here I work for DNR. I've heard sort of through the grapevine that HR and our person that does the FMLA leave is very overwhelmed and has not been providing very good feedback. So, sort of do as much of the work on your end as you can to sort of safeguard yourself and how you want to use your leave.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what sort of a decision tree you'd like to see, David. I would be willing to try and put something like that together, maybe we could meet offline and talk about what you think that should look like. We tried to come up with a couple of the scenarios and, talk about like the order that it's in as a scenario so that, like the ways it can be supplemented. But if there's something that would be more visual or like a good tool, I am open to that and helping create that. And, making sure I've got that with the right people before I post it. But yeah.
And there's another comment in there that people are just saying some of the supervisors don't really know, or some of the HR doesn't really know. And so I think some folks are a little, maybe there's
HR
some
should know better
frustration.
than supervisors, but supervisors are really not knowledgeable about this at all yet.
Yeah. And I think you addressed this too, but some people are saying like, oh, it sounds like, there are more applications that came in than maybe were anticipated. And so some of that wasn't really questions, but maybe just comments. But I do have a few more questions. So one person just said that if you get 50% of your pay through MPL, could you supplement with sick time by using 4 hours of sick time if eligible for that type of leave, and then use MPL for the rest so you get paid fully?
Yeah, you just want to be careful that you don't go over.
So you just can't get overpaid or whatever.
Yeah.
And then
so you might want to shoot for just a little bit under full pay just to make sure you've got that wiggle room with rounding and stuff. Yeah.
So someone said, can you pull the pay estimator and say something about the 55 to 90% part of the wage paid?
Oh, okay. So if your wages are going to be less than 710, that 710 or whatever a week, let me go back to that slide. But it's going to be, they're going to be at 90%. So you'd put in on that estimator what you think your weekly wage is. And, you could look back and see, but like if it's the 711.50 or less, you'd get paid the 90% and then 66 or 55. With the caveat that sometimes it'll be less than 55% if 55% would be more than the 1423. That's the max. So the calculator can help out tremendously with that. Doing the estimate and everything. But ultimately, it's going to be the paid leave program that's going to make that determination based on the wages that were reported for you.
And I know we're getting to the end here, but I was going to say we've got a question that I carry family insurance. If I go on leave, is the employer paying their share of my family insurance, or do they pay what an employee only shares, making my bill be more than I usually pay in a pay period when not on leave?
They're still required to continue the family premium. So you'd still owe your portion of the family premium, but not like single plus yours. So like if you normally would pay whatever it is this month, to something, that would be what you'd owe, not like 500 or 600 or whatever to make up the difference.
Maureen, so you're saying if you go on 100% Minnesota paid leave, so you're not topping off with sick or vacation, if you are the carrier for insurance, you would still pay your employee portion of the premium, so the $200 or whatever it is, but you would and the employer, say the DNR or deed or corrections, would then pay their employer portion. So you would
they're
not,
still required to by law.
So you will not get a larger insurance bill even if you're not topping off. It would you would just either
you're just stuck with it all because you're not topping off.
Okay, I think that was the clarification. So your bill would be the same whether you top off or not.
Right. It's just if you top off, it's coming out of it, so you don't have to come up with it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, another question too. They were just saying, bumping the question, if you have to take leave unexpectedly for about 2 weeks since you applied for MPL and FMLA but haven't heard back if you are approved, does your supervisor have to approve sick leave until you hear from FMLA?
Sick leave shall be granted. Yes.
Okay, excellent. And I know we've got a question too from Emma, and I know that we've got about 2 minutes or so. So just kind of a warning that we'll have the transcript, and then maybe some of these questions need to go into like a parking lot and get answered after the meeting. So, but go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this. This has been incredibly helpful. If I get an extension for my PPL to be for a year after the birth of my child, can I take MPL for 12 weeks of bonding time, then take PPL for 6 weeks of bonding time after for a total of 18 weeks?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay,
You
great.
know,
But
and
if
then
I
your
did,
medical will kind of depend on what your doctor says. So, keep that in mind. It has to be
okay,
consistent. We have a claims adjudicator in here. We'll tell you that, what you're asking for has to be consistent with what your doctor says. Mhm.
sounds good. I feel like I'm recovered, so medical would not be a genuine need at this time. But
Oh, I see what you're saying.
if I took PPL first, since it runs concurrently, I'd have 6 weeks of PPL. Then I'd only have 6 weeks left over for MPL.
Yes.
So then I'd only have 12 weeks.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much for
Although,
clarifying.
you'd be supplementing, right? So it's probably more like in between. So keep that in mind because you're still on MPL. So you could be like MPL for like half and PPL for the other part, and then whatever remaining. So it might be more like 14 weeks, maybe 15. You know what I mean? So
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
And then I think we're at 1 o'clock. So I don't know if we want to kind of leave the rest for the parking lot, and then we can share like this and then just have the parking lot questions. I don't know if we'll compile them and then those could get posted along with this, or I'm not sure, but
Yeah, we could do that. I have one parking lot question about intermittent, right? And so we'll get that one answered, and then any others that weren't answered today we'll post as well. So thank
and
you
there's
all.
just one quick recommendation that if we do another one of these, is it possible to have a CGIP representative come to help with insurance questions? So noted.
I don't know. Perhaps, but what exactly would you want them to be answering? Most of this they're not going to know much about other than, yeah, we're going to bill you if you don't pay it.
So stay tuned for the parking lot questions.
So did anybody have, well, I don't want to say that because there's probably a bunch of questions I haven't answered.
There's a lot.
Okay.
People are very interested.
We'll get those answered. Thank you so much for your time. And hopefully we'll get there, with all the questions. Cynthia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, real quick, I just put in the chat the MAPE webpage that we have for the Minnesota paid leave. So this is the link where the recording will land and where the slides will be. And there's already a little bit of a FAQ, so we can expand on that based on the parking lot questions as well.
Okay. Give me some time to work through them all and find answers for you. But yeah, we'll get that posted. Some of the stuff we'll post right away, but some of it may take a little bit of time. If you have something that's urgent, feel free to reach out to me in the interim. Like if you're trying to get something, across the board with your HR and you're super frustrated right now, certainly, let me know. But I really appreciate you all coming and your interest in the topic, and thank you.